And his co-host, the infamous
Mark Murphy, a Democrat whose party left him. He left the Republicans because he had a conscience. All right.
Jeez, man, you always add something like that. I mean, like half the people shut off their dials. No, I'm just kidding. So we have got an amazing show today. All right. Problem solver politics. We are all about solving problems, getting all sides, all parties, all ears, all minds in the room, and really attacking an issue. And I came across the most interesting person when I was watching actually an interview on Reason TV. I tune in a lot, as many people know here. I have very libertarian leanings in many aspects of my life. I don't like using labels too much, but oftentimes when people really must get one and squeeze one out of me, I oftentimes throw the L over the at the back of my name. But there's this book out written by a guy named Bryan Caplan called The Case Against Education, Why Basically the modern, educational system is a giant waste of time and money. Okay. So super controversial, but super good. I mean, I know that was a horrible 2 thumbs up from super good. All right. That's going to be on like my bloopers reel of 2018, but no joke. There's nothing I love more than when I hear either a new idea and get kind of that aha moment, or else I hear an idea that I just intrinsically feel in my being, like in the fibers of my being. I just feel it, and it's articulated in a way that it's almost like set free from me. Like it's articulated in a way that makes me understand it in a way I never had before.
So this is a groupie now for Bryan Caplan. But I got to tell you, even on the Democratic side, we've perceived that Bryan Caplan is one of the rising thinkers within the conservative libertarian movement. He's presented a lot of detailed, in-depth research. It's pointed out a lot of things that are important to employers and to us as citizens within this country. And we need to pay attention to it, look at it, and see how can we better optimize our education system so that we do produce not only a working society but a thinking society, and it's a very difficult balance.
So without further ado, we're going to actually get Bryan on the phone here. Bryan, are you here, my man? Can you hear us?
Loud and clear.
Okay, so Bryan, this book was amazing. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And I don't want to fanboy it too much here, but I rarely call to action people in my audience to spend their money. I usually call to action to spend their time. But let me tell you, if you have a kid that's about to go to college, if you have a kid that's in high school, if you got a kid whose life you want to make amazing, I really, really think that you should spend the $15.33 on Amazon or whatever it is to go get whatever it is. Yeah, to
keep dropping the price, so that's good news.
Yeah, so drop the $20 bill as taxes keep going up on sales on paper in California. Drop the $20 bill and go get The Case Against Education. Well, not against education. I noticed that you actually you give a lot of detail. Now, before I just let you speak here, I will tell my audience, I really would sum up this man's attitude. I love the sentence where you said, "My thesis is contrarian, but my statistics aren't." So this isn't just some kind of, dystopian rant against a guy who didn't get much out of high school. This is a well thought out, amazing analysis of the modern educational system from the point of view of somebody who has been in it from what I think you referenced was you're in your 41st grade, you said.
That's right. Yeah, going into 43rd now, I think.
Oh, excellent. So, Bryan, just tell us a little bit about the book and what brought you to writing this book and giving it its title.
Yeah, well, so the book is called The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money, and it really begins with 2 puzzles. Puzzle number 1 is that when you look at what people study in school, it doesn't seem like you're likely to use most of it on the job. And puzzle 2 is employers still seem to pay a lot of extra money to people who have degrees. So why do they pay all this extra money to people who know a lot of stuff that they don't actually need to know in order to do their job? And the answer that I give is that even when what you're studying is not actually useful on the job, still the fact that you did well in it is convincing to employers. It makes them think, well, if this person could go and do philosophy that well, probably they can go and work in my bank and be an adequate employee or maybe even a good employee. So really what I say is a lot of education is about what we call signaling. Namely, it's a way of convincing employers, of showing off, making people feel like you are employable. Right? And again, from the point of view of an individual, it doesn't really matter very much why your education pays, whether you learn useful skills or whether you just persuaded employers that you're worthwhile. But from the point of society, it matters a lot because, if the main thing that you get in schools is a sticker of employability, well, if everybody's got a sticker, then you need 2 stickers to stand out. If everyone has 2 stickers, you need 3 stickers to stand out. So what I say is that a lot of what's been going on in our society for the last really 70 years is what's called credential inflation, where the amount of education that you need in order to be deemed worthy of an interview just keeps going up and up. There's a lot of jobs where previously you didn't even need high school, and now you need college to get them. So, back when my mom was a secretary in the 1950s, you probably didn't even need to have finished high school in order to do that job. But now, very likely you have to have a college degree just to be a secretary. So, so basically, we have a system where if one individual wants to get a good job, they go and get more school. But when everybody gets a lot more, when the overall level goes up, employers just jack up the requirements. So, it's a treadmill. It's a really futile system that we set up.
I love, just like I said in the preface to this show, in this interview, was I love how somebody articulates an idea that I already had. I had this joke when I actually went to BYU, Brigham Young University. And
oh, really?
Yeah, it's a prestigious university known mostly for its, high moral character of the general person that graduates from there. It's got some specifically, really good programs. Not particularly a research university, but it's I think it's got pretty good street cred out there, right? But people would ask me all the time, oh, why'd you choose BYU? And I would make this joke. I'd say because I want my comments to carry more weight in elders quorum. Because the third hour of Sunday school is divided, girls go to Relief Society, men go to elders quorum. And there's this, like you call it, a signaling function of like, oh, he graduated from BYU. I saw no other use for this. And it's been a frustration of mine that I really feel like, and when I said this when I graduated, that a college degree is the new GED. Mm-hmm. I mean, if anybody wants to do anything reputable out there, now there's some things where you have to have a master's, an MSW, to even start being a social worker. So your 4-year bachelor's is worth no use. And my daughter was diagnosed with cancer, and we fought for 9 months at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And the physical therapists now have to have a doctorate. With your master's, you're no longer eligible to have it. So you have to be a straight-up doctor before you can receive. I mean, you're in your 22nd year of public education before you're allowed to help my little 15-month-old waddle down the steps, And so I have felt like, just like there's grade creep, there's this crazy credential creep. And what I want to know is, I feel like I've seen specific ways that this has hurt our society. But there were some stats in the book that you mentioned of how this has had a detrimental effect. How has it had a detrimental effect?
Well, I mean, the main thing is you just have to go to school for all these years and pay all this money in order to get a job that your grandparents could probably have gotten right out of high school. So really, what's the point? Again, so it does vary by occupation. There are some occupations where you really do need more years of training, and the kind of education varies. But still, what I show in the book is that when people really break it down and look at occupation by occupation, by far the main thing that's happened is just that you need more degrees to get the very same jobs that your grandparents or parents could have gotten with less, and only a small amount is explained by the rising complexity or technical demands of the jobs. And again, even with the jobs that we have, a lot of evidence that people really actually get their training by doing it. Like you're mentioning, medical school. So there's plenty of countries where you go and get your your medical degree right after high school. You don't have to go and do a bachelor's degree first like you do in the U.S. Yeah. So again, it is just this crazy system where, there's all these hoops people have to jump through. And again, the question that economists always ask me is, well, if it's such a dumb system, then why doesn't someone just do something else? And my answer is, well, if you do something else, then people say, well, obviously you're not doing the regular thing because you can't hack it. You're not good enough. So, it really is a system where if you want to go and succeed, you've got to go and jump through the hoops other people are jumping through, or else people assume the worst of you.
Hey, Brian, I've got a couple questions related to this. Now, keep
Sure.
in mind, I had the good fortune to go to Georgetown University, then go right into the military, so I got additional training. I had an accounting degree, and I never used my accounting other than as a peripheral understanding of business. I hired accountants to work for me, but in so doing, I found a lot more interest in areas of business, whether it was in operations and sales, none of which I actually learned in the university. So I concur in understanding that if I'd had more operational training or some of the skill sets in that area, whether it had been in time management or other kind of classes, that would have been of greater value. But what I noticed was, has the world become that much more complex? And I'm talking about for communication, the devices we use, the thinking that we have to use, even the simple jobs related to cleaning now. The standards are different. They're much more intense. They're rigorous. All the things that are required today for so much of our performance is more challenging than what our predecessors in the past had.
Right. So, that's a great question, and sometimes you're right. But still, the researchers that work in this area have considered that, and the main conclusion is there are some jobs where they are indeed more demanding, even though it has the same name as it did 50 years ago.
Okay.
But there's a lot of other jobs that are actually a lot easier. Right, so sometimes technology complicates a job, but other times it simplifies it. So think about this. Like in the 50s, the servers in restaurants would have done a lot of math, because they would actually add up your bill at their table. They wouldn't have had a cash register. Like a lot of them. I mean, even remember in the 90s in Europe, I still would have waiters coming to the table and adding up your bill right in front of you. That would basically never happen today. So that is a skill that you no longer need to be a waiter, whereas in the past it was actually a critical part of the job. And again, it's hard actually to really say this convincingly just in a conversation, but people have looked at the numbers a lot, and the main conclusion is overall, if anything, it seems like one and the same job is simpler to do rather than more complex. Because a lot of what technology does is simplify things. Also, think about like a cashier at a grocery store. Used to be they'd be looking at things and they'd be scanning and they'd be typing in the numbers, and now they just swipe it with a barcode. You barely even need to speak English to be a cashier in a restaurant or a grocery store now, whereas in the past you might have actually needed to say, well, what's going on here? What is this product? And now it's technology has actually simplified that job a lot.
I'd like to know how you knew I was a waiter.
I had no idea you were. Although, it's a good guess. It's a common job, but no.
And it is, and I understand what you're talking about.
Waiter.
Yeah, the mathematical side to it used to really kind of sometimes befuddle me. Just one of those things.
I don't think you're alone.
Natural.
I'm pretty sure.
Did you add numbers?
I made sure that I got a 30% tip because I couldn't figure out how to get a 10%.
Okay, good.
I'm pretty sure I saw Jimmy Kimmel, one of those little snippets where he goes out in public and asks people to make change for him, and probably 9 out of 10 people on Ventura Boulevard couldn't even do it. So I love how you just said, you mentioned how technology has changed our society, and in turn it must change our education. I have noticed one of my biggest frustrations is, I went to college, right? And I originally started out actually as a physics major. And then I served a 2-year mission in Argentina. I fell in love with the Spanish language, and I switched from physics, and actually astrophysics was my emphasis, to Spanish literature and poetry. You can imagine the enthusiasm of my mother when I told her I was switching to Spanish. But
you're apparently attracted to extremely low employment fields. I don't know which is harder to get a job in astrophysics or Spanish literature, but they're both a real uphill battle.
Yeah,
and if you know what he's doing now, you'll go, what?
So anyway, I did tell her, though. I remember having the conversation where I told her, I said, I don't even know why I went to college at all, because ultimately I'm going to end up in entertainment, and my personality is what's going to make me my money, because I'm actually producing a film right now. It's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Obviously, I'm doing this radio show right now. I got my first executive producer credit last year. And these are skills that you learn via, honestly, I got more job training as a door-to-door salesman for Orkin Pest Control the 3 summers that I did paying for college. You know what I'm saying? My summer job paying for college, I think literally prepared that, and wood shop probably literally prepared me more for my modern profession now. And when I was in college, I got to tell you, I had a friend who wanted to go continue his dad's large firm. But now the government contracts, because he would literally build like schools. His dad's firm would build schools. Well, now you have to have a 4-year degree to run that company, even though his dad never graduated from college. So he was in this construction management degree, which is total bogus. Like, we're throwing credits for the 45 grand that we're going to charge you at this. And his roommate wanted to take over the family trucking business. They had about 8 to 12 trucks that ran in, kind of the western seaboard, California, Wyoming, Nevada, and Arizona. And now, in order to get their contracts, you needed a transportation management degree where you get your CDL at a 4-year university, and then you throw like 19th century German philosophy and all these social justice majors out there, like women's studies, gender studies, which is just basically man-hating 101. You know what I'm saying? And I would see 7 out of 8 of these kids that I was quote, studying with at the university, I was just thinking, what a monumental waste of time. I mean, my grandfather at 17 worked for the railroad as an engineer. He was straight up taking the wheels off of Amtrak trains and putting them back on. People's lives depended on this 17-year-old. And I feel one of the biggest problems that this perpetual education has created is twofold. We indebt the masses. I mean, the largest income that the U.S. government has, I think, off its people, I was reading the stat, is actually the interest on all of its FAFSA loans.
Brian, what is it? It's not 1.3 trillion now that in educational loans. What's the new number?
So I was just looking at this. So like 1.5 trillion in outstanding debt.
Yeah. I mean, don't we spend like $4 trillion on the military or something? Aren't we reaching like how much we spend on the military just on debt?
Remember that that's the total amount of accumulated debt. That's from all years. So it's not really a good comparison.
Okay.
But,
thanks. I just got put in my place from the other side of the country.
Yeah, it's like comparing rent versus how much you owe on your mortgage. Like they're just different kinds of things.
Well, Brian, one thing I was curious. In my year of graduation, back in '78, 25% of my peers actually got a 4-year degree. Mm-hmm. Today, I understand, is the number around 50, 55% that are getting a 4-year degree?
No, I mean, so attempting, yes, but attempting. But the failure rate is so high. So I think right now, like out of people like 25 to 30, I think it's up to something like 35, 37% to finish a bachelor's degree. So maybe 33, 35, but anyway, like about 35%.
So we're still,
but out of people who have just finished high school, about 70% would at least start some kind of college, whether it's 4-year or 2-year. But then the completion rate though is much lower.
Wow.
Now that seems to be the weakness, and I know that's one of the issues that like our local community college is focusing so intently on, both as a transition feeder into our 4-year programs in the state of California, but also what they're trying to do on the 2-year. One of the things that I've noticed, though, both with my own kids who are in college or have just graduated, one was it took them maybe as much as a year or two within the educational system to determine what it is they really had an interest in. And keep in mind, I worked very hard, my wife and I worked very hard to train them in identifying this early on. What were their passions and what were their attributes and skill sets? So it wasn't like we were just saying, hey, go have fun, go to college and get a degree. I've got one kid who's at Westmont, and it only costs the same thing as it does at Georgetown. It's about $60-some thousand a year. You don't want him to be floundering around. You want him to know what he's doing. It took him 2 years. Okay, so...
Well, I don't mind a little bit of floundering, only because I saw this great quote on the wall when I was in college where it said, the beauty of college, it's the only time in your life where your only job is the cultivation of the mind, which I think
Fantastic.
I think the mind can be a muscle just as much as your body can be. But I also think that just like if you only lift weights on your arms, you're going to be one of those guys in the gym that walks around like a chicken with no legs and nothing but a huge set of biceps. I really think that there is value in the cultivation of the mind, but I just feel like we've gotten so top heavy. I love what Marco Rubio said in the Republican debates in the beginning, where he said we vilified trade schools to such a degree that these kids feel like they're failures if they learn how to have a 6-figure carpet laying job, And I've noticed this in my job. My family runs we run a pest control company, and you'll see some of these young hires where it's like, we literally tell them, hey, there's 2 jobs available. There's office job for like $10 an hour, or you can go out and be a technician for $20. And they're like, oh, no, I don't work with my hands. No, that would, like, my mother would kill me. You know what I'm saying? And I just think she'd kill you for making double. We have so vilified the trades and work that, I mean, for the past 23 years, here's another stat I was looking up, the most underemployed position in America has been auto mechanic.
Of course. Hey, Brian, let me ask you, what aspect of this whole creepage on education, where they want the sheepskins, is tied to this concept of our view, or the class-type society, this view that having that sheepskin is a more beautiful thing and far more important to the family than simply having a well-paid career?
Right. So that's not really the focus of the book, but yeah, I think you're right that there are a lot of middle-class parents who would rather that you go and have a college degree and be like a cashier in a bookstore than working as a plumber, because as long as you have the college degree and you're working as a cashier at a bookstore, they can kind of feel like, well, eventually he's going to transition into what they feel like is a real job. Whereas you're working working as a plumber, then they feel like, okay, well, that's what he is, and
that's
and
his
then
career.
There's social distance between us, but.
So
there's that. I mean, although I think so much of it is just built into the junior high and high school system, or middle school and high school system, where legislatively, college for all is basically the way that schools work. That's the main thing they're preparing everybody for. And there's an idea of trade school is something you do if you fail at college, right? Which is foolish in many ways. I mean, of course, one of them is a lot of people, once they fail at college after having tried and to do everything that their parents and teachers have been telling them for years, don't feel like trying something else. They're just frustrated. And then, there's a lot of people where you can just look at the kind of person they are and say, look, this kid probably is never going to do well in college. He just doesn't like that kind of thing. He doesn't like sitting still. He likes working with his hands. So why don't we go and try to prepare him for his likely future rather than push him into something that is such a long shot?
Yeah, I had this kid that worked for me that was such an amazing metal worker. He would make out of rebar and these things really high-end artwork. I remember he made a toilet roll holder out of rebar that looked like something Johnny Depp would spend $50,000 on, or that you'd see in some high-end hotel in the meatpacking district of Manhattan, right? And I'm like, dude, you could unload these for $5,000 each. You sell one of those a month, and you're doing better than an entry-level PhD at the local community college, man. Go for this. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what the problems are. We're gonna have to take a break here in 1 minute, but solutions. I mean, the show's called Problem Solver Politics. What are some solutions that we have towards this system if we ourselves are preparing to engage in education, or our listeners out there who have kids are going to go to college, or maybe considering going back to college themselves? What are some solutions that you would suggest?
All right, so to tell you after the break, right?
I think we should lead into that.
I was about to say that's probably going to be a long.
I can throw another quick question at you that kind of pulls it in a little tighter too, and that is, here we are. We recognize we've got this sheepskin inflation, and one of the reasons is probably because people find that's more important to raise their status in life. The second part, though, is why is the college system so expensive today versus what it was 25, 30, 40 years ago? And I'll compare Georgetown University. It cost $4,000 for tuition. Today, it's in somewhere in the neighborhood. I think it's $46,000 to $48,000 a year. That's far more than standard inflation.
Yeah.
Right. So the main thing to know about that is that hardly anyone pays the actual full price anymore. So it is misleading to go and look at what the list price was 30 years ago and what the list price is today, because it's like airplane tickets, or going to see a movie, where depending upon exactly who you are and what you're doing, you're probably you may or may not be getting some very big discounts. So anyway, for your expensive private schools, almost everyone is getting big discounts. So when you go and look at the price that people actually pay, it has still risen faster than inflation, but it's not nearly as shocking as if you just look at the websites, which do actually make your eyes bug out, and rightly so. But you have to look underneath the surface a bit more to realize what's really going on.
So how did you know my son actually gets significant grants and scholarships at Westmont? Okay, you knew it. And I went to Georgetown for free.
And he knew you were a waiter. All right, we are talking to Brian Kaplan, author of The Case Against Education. This is Problem Solver Politics. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Looking for the best return on your investment? Do you want your hard-earned dollars stretched to do the most good for your community? That means that out of every dollar donated, a full 99 cents goes directly to the need being addressed. Help the Children is in Santa Clarita, helping Santa Clarita families and other Santa Clarita charities. When compared to more than 1.2 million charities in America, Help the Children is rated the 7th most efficient charity in the nation, operating on a 1% overhead, and we receive no government funding for our operations in the community. If you are looking to donate to the good of the Santa Clarita community, please consider partnering with Help the Children. What is donated specifically for Santa Clarita is kept in Santa Clarita and will help over 5,000 families and over 10 other agencies. Please visit our website and or call our office to make a difference in our awesome town community. 702-8852, helpthechildren.org.
Your hometown station.
Your hometown station has everything you want. The best variety of your favorite songs and the KHTS Talk Block every weekday from 10 to 2. Complete podcasts are available on hometownstation.com and on our YouTube channel. The KHTS Talk Block. Weekdays 10 to 2 right here on your hometown station.
98.1 FM and AM 1220.
All right. Welcome back. This is Problem Solver Politics. We are on the air with Brian Kaplan, author of The Case Against Education, and we're going to continue our conversation here. We pretty much summed up pretty well, I think, a mutual agreement on some of the most frustrating aspects of the current educational system. And this is such a great and important interview nowadays because I was watching this video and it was so intriguing to me where it was saying that within like 10 years, India is going to be the largest English-speaking country. And by the way, I know I'm brutalizing the statistics. There's the spirit of the statistics, not the law of the statistics, okay? But basically, in X short-term amount of years, India is going to be the largest English-speaking country, and 7 of the 11 highest top-paid jobs in America don't exist yet. Like, they don't exist yet. We are changing so quickly that I feel like not only is our educational system of sit down, shut up, and what Brian calls so eloquently virtue signaling, not virtue signaling, but, you know, educational signaling, not only is that a little bit outdated, but I feel like we are not, but by continuing this antiquated educational model that not only is, I feel like we're driving an old car where it just takes too much money to upkeep it and it guzzles too much gas to drive it. You know what I'm saying? That it's just not going to be able to compete in the 21st century. Like, how can we start righting this ship, Brian? Like, what can we do? How can we weaponize this information that we've now gathered by reading your book and by actually experiencing the educational system ourselves? How can we convert it like swords to plowshares? You know, how can we convert it into better our society?
Right. Well, my first and biggest idea is also one of the least popular ones, but I'll tell you anyway.
We love least popular on this show, okay?
But here's the good news: it's almost impossible to fail, and it's to spend less money. Right now, government pours hundreds of billions of dollars on the education system every year, and of course, a major goal is to make it as affordable as possible for everyone. And as I said, the main effect of this is not that everybody can get a good job. The main effect is that employers just keep jacking up the expectations for how much school you have. So I say in the same way that as access to education has increased and credentials have multiplied, and this has caused the problems that we're talking about, if we could go and just put things in reverse and just spend less, so that employers can no longer reasonably expect people to have these degrees. Right now, the reason why employers can be so picky about degrees is there's so many of them floating around. If it were harder to do and if funding were scarcer, fewer people would do it, and employers would then say, well, I guess we've got to lower our standards here. We can't expect a college degree for a secretary because, if people have to pay their own way, hardly anyone is going to be willing to do it to get that job.
Brian, you said that a little bit earlier that, back in the days of the 70s, we were talking about 25% had degrees. Now we're talking about only in the 30s, 37, 30 have degrees. So there's not been the output that justifies the demand for the degreed candidate. That they're not there, if I understand it correctly. And so what's going on? Where do we find these people?
Where do we find people with the college degrees?
Enough of them to be able to say that justifies this whole massive creep of expectations.
Well, I feel like that's actually kind of part of the problem because, like, for example, I'm here in Hollywood, and I'm producing movies. I don't know, except for a handful of Californian universities that have very theoretical film programs, not practical ones. How do you get an editor? These are all people that learn from their dad. To be honest with you, I know people that literally went to college, got $100,000 in debt just to go and become an editor like their dad. It makes me think, why didn't you just skip college?
Well, my daughter's an animator that came out of Cal State University, Northridge, and she would tell you that's how she became an art teacher.
Well, but now
she's the animation art teacher for our high school, one of our big high schools here. The issue is she was taught technically, and I can assure you I have not an artistic impression in my entire bloodline. But what I am curious about, though, okay, we spend less. Now, you come out of an institute, the McCamish Institute is known for having been funded in a large degree by the Koch brothers. They're the second one of the largest privately held corporations in America. It has been a motivation of them to try and spend less, not only on the government side from the taxation side, but also to spend less for their employees. And obviously they have a lot. The question I have is how do you avoid having the perception and the influence that says my data is not corrupted by what Charles Koch believes or wants me to do?
Right. Well, my experience, it's very hard to persuade people that that you're saying what you actually believe. And yes, pretty much any time someone mentions the Koch brothers, I say, well, I guess it doesn't really matter what I say because this person is just angry at me. All I can tell you is
you're supposed to defend yourself. Come on, man. I'm a worker. I was an employer. I get it.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
All that I can say is that in all my years of working on this, the number of phone calls I ever received from the Kochs, one way or the other, about what I'm working on is zero. I never got even a phone call saying, good work, Brian. I'm glad you're doing it.
I'm really glad.
We believe in you, Brian. We believe that this is the reality.
I'm really glad that Brian just said that because when you get your Koch brothers stuff going on, I would like to think that what Brian meant, and something that has frustrated me, is I think there's two really bad economic problems I think fund accounting in the military just incentivizes people to be wasteful.
Absolutely.
In an area where you need incredible strength but not waste. And a big frustration of mine as a mother who's a public educator and a father who taught in the university system, I was actually going to be a teacher myself for a long time until actually they said it's gotten so politically crazy you shouldn't do it. You'd be fired in a week. But I've noticed that it frustrates me, especially here in California, that Hoot and Mufflin or, these big publisher companies will come out and they'll tell the California Teachers Association and the NEA and the Department of Education and the, LAUSD that, oh, man, we took a test sample of your kids and according to this latest greatest test we made, they're failing. But no, if you spend $100 million on these ergonomic pencils, right, these iPads with our apps, our brand new textbooks, and these cool, lumbar supported desks, that all of a sudden your kids will no longer be failing according to our test. So we dump all this money in. So when you say you spend less money, I think spend the same amount of money smarter, or else what do you mean exactly when you say spend less money? What's your approach to spending less money on education?
Well, there's a lot of ways of doing it, but the simplest one is when your state or federal government decides how much money to appropriate for education, knock a zero off that amount. No. that really is the easiest way. Here's the thing now, people almost always say, no, don't spend less, spend smarter. here's the thing. It's hard to spend smarter because you have to actually figure something out and know something. It's really easy to spend less, right? I have this analogy in the book where I say, suppose that you've got a toenail fungus cream that you're using, and then someone comes along and says, look, there's great evidence saying that cream doesn't work, so stop wasting your money on it. And then you say, well, tell me what does work. And your friend says, well, I don't know what works. As far as I know, there isn't anything that works very well on toenail fungus. And you say, well, fine, then I'm going to keep spending the money until you tell me something good to spend it on. I mean, I think that really is the kind of thing that pervades, government spending in general, is that people say, look, we have to spend better rather than less. And yet, if what you're spending on isn't working, it's much easier to say, well, let's just cut it and wait around until we learn something that actually works. And we may never find that thing. Actually, it's just hard to improve things, but it's easy to save money. So, not popular, but I just want to push the general wisdom of saving money on stuff that isn't really paying off, rather than something which is much harder, which is figuring out a good way to do it. Now, if you were to go and ask me, but aren't there some educational techniques that work better and would improve things? I actually do know some, but here's the striking thing. I'd say, they've been well known to work for a very long time, and yet they're still barely used, right?
Okay.
Which I think shows that there's just something basically dysfunctional about the system, that things can be well understood and yet nevertheless ignored. Again, whenever I actually look at what's going on inside of schools, what I see is teachers who have no real interest in measuring effectiveness. Teachers want to be artists. They don't want to have anyone come and measure whether what they've done actually accomplished anything. And again, that sort of mentality of the teacher as artist is what makes me very skeptical about finding a good way to spend money rather than doing the simpler thing of just spending less and say, well, if you can ever figure out something that works well and you can demonstrate it, we'll come back to us then.
Okay, so it's interesting. We're only on question 2 of the 4 that I had here, and we're going to have to end this interview in 10 minutes.
You're looking like zero-based budgeting, with the idea being try and justify how you're spending.
Zero-based budgeting is a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. Saying, look, show us that you're actually accomplishing something first. Don't tell us what your hopes and dreams are. Show us what you have done with the money with which you have been entrusted. And if it's not impressive after a bunch of years, we're not going to keep giving you the money. That's crazy.
How much of this cost of education, though, and I completely understand this concept of we've now added grants, we've granted all different opportunities to, quote, artificially reduce or to reduce the artificial price that's been put in place. But how do we go in there and say to them, cut down your administration? Let's reduce all of these teams, task force directors, managers, and these very high six-figure salaries that seem to permeate our entire system from elementary school all the way through our advanced college system.
Well, and the other thing, too, is LA Unified School District is the single largest political donor in California.
Absolutely.
The thing that frustrates me is they're furloughing teachers here and saying, oh, we don't have the money to pay the teachers. And you do the math, the $11 million you gave to different political campaigns last year spread out over the 2,235 teachers.
I remember the Koch brothers matched it, so it's okay. So we're okay on the other side.
I did the math. And it was something like $6,000 per teacher. And I thought, you know what? That's not a year's worth of pay, but that softens the blow. That's a serious severance. So if LAUSD didn't engage in political campaign donations for a year, just that one aspect of their administration alone, they'd soften a half-year blow of a teacher that, all of a sudden isn't making any money. So anyway, here's my second question is, I had this little list of questions, and I thought, okay, so this system sucks right now. Have you ever encountered a system, Brian, that didn't? Where you thought, okay, wow, they really do it well. Like Bernie Sanders all the time is getting up there and be like, yeah, in Sweden, they're amazing because, and I always want to say because they don't have a military and we defend them, so they have all this money floating around for other stuff, But like, have you ever encountered a system where you're like, wow, these guys are doing it a lot closer to right than we are?
Yeah, I'd say probably my favorite is Switzerland. Switzerland, they've kept the share of people with college degrees down to a quite low level. I think it's only about 10% of the adult workforce would have bachelor's degrees or something like that.
Okay.
And they have a much bigger role for vocational educations. And of course, I've never heard anyone go into Switzerland and say, "Wow, these people don't seem like they know how to do their jobs." It's quite the opposite. It's like, "Wow, they built a train that goes up a goat path. That's pretty impressive." So when I look at Switzerland, again, really what they managed to do is just reduce the amount of time that people are wasting to get people, actually learning by doing, learning how to do their jobs the real way in a reasonable amount of time, and also just accepting the fact that a lot of people just don't like academics, so it makes a lot more sense to train them for a practical skill than hold them in school and let them fail out when they're finally in college, which is basically the American way.
So tell me, what do we do to get to cross that gap and build that bridge between where we are right now and Switzerland? Because I know there's a cultural difference there. Like the Swiss are very culturally, there's a difference there, and I'm sure it somehow permeates into education. Also, I was very impressed when I was in Germany that all the 12-year-olds, they start getting the last 2 hours of their classes by the time they hit junior high to pick a vocation, and then they would go to the Mercedes dealership and then start turning a wrench with the Mercedes guy, and then some of them would go over to the the Siemens plant and start actually mixing the chemicals with the guys, and it was rudimentary, simple stuff. But it was like they skipped that 4-year gap starting in high school to begin training in these vocations. So, how do we bridge that gap? Are there any measures you think that we actually could take besides these? Unfortunately, I doubt we could convince Congress all of a sudden to, take a zero off their budgets because, that hits re-election. I mean, are there any suggestions you would have that you see as perceived low-hanging fruit right now?
Yeah. So, some very basic things, like just stop encouraging every kid to go to college. The current system just has so much propaganda about sending every kid to college. And when you are designing the curriculum, so much attention is paid to the illusion that every kid is likely to succeed in college, when we just know that that's not true. So, if you just want to do very marginal things, just change.
No, we want to do major things. We're just thinking marginal first.
Yeah, but just changing the propaganda is a pretty good first step. If you were just to change the even continue doing what you're doing, but sincerely stop telling people that college is a good path for everybody. And I think when I was talking to people at the Department of Education, they were saying standard question when the U.S. president visits kindergarten is how many kids here want to go to college, and sort of give the kids a nudge to have every hand in the room go up. I think that whole idea just makes so little sense and just runs so against. Really just runs against the diversity of human nature. Where just a lot of people do not like the kind of stuff that goes on in college. It just rubs them the wrong way. They want to accomplish practical tasks. They don't want to sit around discussing Kierkegaard. So that's a very marginal thing, but I think that's doable.
By the way, you totally know you're talking with an academic when what you thought was Kierkegaard.
Hey, wait a second. I've taken 2 theology classes.
Was all of a sudden correctly pronounced as Kierkegaard or whatever.
You already said. I've read 150 books.
I just got humbled.
Here's the question, though. Stephen Covey did a lot of pioneering work on the conscience of the importance of a conscience to be able to understand how to apply those technical skills. How important is it for someone to go and have the classes in the sociology, theology, psychology, et cetera, to help develop that conscience so he's a better worker?
Right. So this is the kind of thing where you can answer the question 2 ways. One is you can sit in a room and think, well, wouldn't it be great if everyone took these classes because that would make them good people? Or you could go and measure the actual change in behavior that you get from people who take the classes. I think the second thing is the right way to go about this. And there's been a fair amount of research on this, and it's very disappointing. So particularly there's been studies of philosophers who specialize in ethics, and they just try to measure how ethical their behavior is, and they don't seem particularly ethical, even though that's the main thing they study all the time. So,
Bill Clinton was an ethics professor.
Like just sitting in a classroom and writing essays about ethics doesn't have much effect on how ethical people are.
Well,
we might wish it be different, but it doesn't seem like it's true.
Great businessmen don't have to go bankrupt to find a way to run their country. So, I really appreciate the fact that you've come up with a lot of very cool evaluations of what we are doing wrong, and there's many things we could be doing right. And I love your ideas on propaganda. I don't think on concepts of saying not everybody should be going to college. We try and work with that concept, but it is challenging.
All right, so we got one more question when we come back from the other side of this break right now. We got to take a short commercial break, but I got one more question. It's going to be pretty cool for this guy. So this is Problem Solver Politics. Don't touch that dial.
Every year, thousands of local children, teens, and adults receive treatment at the Child and Family Center for depression, anger, anxiety, abuse, thoughts of suicide, and drug and alcohol addictions. Our professional staff provides outpatient services at office locations, in the home, the community, and on many elementary, junior, and high school campuses throughout our valley. If you need help, Contact Child and Family Center at 259-9439 or childfamilycenter.org. Improving lives, one family at a time.
We'd like to thank our advertisers and readers for their loyal support since 1991.
Linda and Mo Hafizi, owners of our Valley's two leading magazines, Elite and the Magazine of Santa Clarita.
The only magazine in our valley mailed to 80,000 homes and businesses every month, with over 250 pages of community news and features.
Discover how the Magazine of Santa Clarita can help your business. Call 294-4444.
Superior quality is second nature to us. Just ask our advertisers.
Koalas at the zoo, they're waiting for you at the Santa Barbara Zoo. Koalas at the zoo, they're at the zoo, so fuzzy and cute, super cute, and they're waiting there for you.
Come visit Edmund and Thackeray, the new koalas at the Santa Barbara Zoo today.
Koalas at the zoo.
All right. Welcome back. This is Problem Solver Politics. We are on air with Brian Kaplan, the author of The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. Go buy the book. It's the first book I've recommended all of this year where I've said go buy it and then buy the $3 Sharpie highlighter with it afterwards.
Well, and this is a book highly recommended as well by those on the opposite side of the spectrum. While it might be perceived as being a little more libertarianism concept, many of Brian's ideas are very applicable to how we raise our children and also how we handle employees. There's a lot of ideas there that we need to pay attention to because none of us are happy with this current highly inflated education system.
Okay, so I saw this libertarian shirt. I buy shirts on occasion from this website called Libertarian Country or libertarian1.com or something. I don't remember what. And usually, they're just funny political one-liners. But one of them said, make Orwell fiction again. Okay. and instead of make America great again, it was make Orwell fiction again. And it looked kind of like a MAGA hat, but it said make Orwell fiction again, And I will always believe in human incompetence over conspiracy theories. That's why I balk at your Koch brothers nonsense sometimes.
Yeah.
But I really do feel like if a conspiracy theorist wanted to look at the American education system, he could easily say, we're propagandizing, I love to use the word propaganda, but we're propagandizing an education so we can send them to thought police camps where they are indoctrinated at their own cost, indebting them into a system that makes the government money.
I thought that was Boy Scouts.
That's not Boy Scouts.
Yeah, we're both Boy Scout leaders, so we know.
Yeah, so I don't think that's actually what's going on, and I doubt, the Illuminati got together before they formed the Federal Reserve and said, we've got to pump American universities with, this money. I believe it's just kind of a natural cycle of well-intentioned individuals hoping to help the next generation, accidentally breeding a Frankenstein monster, okay?
Keep thinking that. But
Yeah.
let's ask Brian a question in terms of, because you've got some great ideas in your books and your research. Let's go.
Okay, so you mentioned I want to get more on another way you think we could solve it. I like you said, stop propagandizing, sending so many kids, and spend less money. Anything else that we should really try to embrace as a society to make this more like that Switzerland model that you mentioned?
Yeah, so vocational education that starts at an early age. So starting in middle school, and having vocational options, and just being very open to the idea that a lot of kids don't want to go to college, and you need to go and expose them to some other options that are realistic. So basically, before they have gotten frustrated with trying something that isn't likely to succeed, go and say, hey, look, are you interested in being a plumber, an electrician? And again, key thing about vocational education is people think of it like you were saying, as something where you go and tell a 12-year-old, right, you were a plumber, this is your life. Whereas, there's no reason you couldn't have vocational education where you go and expose kids to 20 careers 2 weeks each over the course of an academic year.
That's a good idea.
Just to go and see whether there's anything that sticks. And of course, the earlier you start, the more time you have for exploration. So again, like the problem we have right now is it's one where everyone is basically tracked for college, and then if college doesn't work out for you, as it doesn't for most of the people who try it, then you sort of say, well, now you kind of have to figure it out for yourself. It would make a lot more sense to try to help kids figure things out for themselves at an early age and give them some guidance about jobs that are actually realistic. Whenever I start saying this, people start saying, well, it's hard to predict the future. And I say, look, we know some things about the future, like there's not going to be a lot of jobs for poets, there's not going to be a lot of jobs for historians, and yet these are the kinds of things that kids have to spend a lot of time on in school. So at least, take your best guess about what's realistic, and maybe you'll be wrong, but better to go and at least try to predict the future than just to keep doing what we've been doing for the last 200 years.
Okay, so we got 3 minutes left here, and in that, what you're saying right now, I think, okay, that's great. Start vocational school a lot earlier. Here's my only concern with that is I go to local elementary school here, New Hall Elementary, and their numbers are horrible with reading and math. They're abysmal in some aspects. But as the son of an educator, I know that can be a false flag. Like a lot of parents freak out and they don't want to send their kids there, but I know that it's because they are dragging every Tom, Dick, and Harry that's an ESL student with no linguistic background through all these standardized tests, because America's educational system has this beauty that it doesn't leave a kid behind, okay? Whereas in Japan, they always want to say, well, Japan is so much better at their SAT scores. Their 13-year-olds are averaging like 1,100, while ours are only getting 1,000. Well, yeah, that's because we've tested every autistic kid that can barely read all the way up to our geniuses in the exact same boat. While over there, if 8 years old, you're not basically Einstein Jr., they put you in carpet laying class, and you're just taken out of the academic race altogether. So I know we want to start at a younger vocational age, but in like the last 90 seconds, how do we not become Japan by doing that?
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. There's two possible evils in the world. One is that you go and take a kid that's never going to succeed in college and you deprive him of all vocational options and you shove him along, and then he goes to college and fails out and is super bitter about it and never winds up doing much of anything. The other one, though, is you have a kid with a lot of potential where you go and tell him he's a plumber and that's all that he ever does with his life. And right now we have a system where we are totally focused on the second problem, no matter how rare it is, and we totally ignore the first problem. And I say we should just admit that there are two problems and there's no perfect solution.
All right. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you must go out and you must buy the book, okay? It's by Brian Kaplan, and the title is The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. Buy the hardcover, because you're going to be reading it twice, let me tell you. Actually, I got the Kindle version, so that was a little bit hypocritical of me, you know what I'm saying? But go out there and get it. Brian, thank you so much for coming out today. The floor is yours in the last 20 seconds. What do you want to tell us, my man?
Let's see. Well, so almost everyone in the society goes through tons of years of school, and you heard all the stuff about how great it is. And I would just say, don't believe what your teachers told you. Believe what you saw with your own eyes. Did you really see that they were teaching you all sorts of useful stuff, or did you see that they were wasting a lot of your time? And make up your mind that way.
Oh, this is awesome. This is awesome.
And keep in mind that George Mason, you're giving Georgetown a run for their money.
All right, awesome.
All right.
Guys, we have been on air with Brian Kaplan. Once again, the author is The Case Against Education.